Assistant City Manager, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Tonight's roll call. Casagrande is, actually she contacted me that she would be, so she's excused. Dumas?
Here.
Calhoun?
Here.
Dumas?
Here.
Calhoun?
Here.
Bosenga?
Here.
McClure?
Here.
Wells?
Here.
Mayor Terry?
Yes.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is citizen comments on any subject except those items scheduled for public hearing. In this special city council meeting, we don't have any public hearing items. Those who have signed in will be given the first opportunity to speak. Time is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, 36 minutes total speaking time for this agenda item. And if you could say if you're inside or outside city limits. Madam Clerk, is anyone signed in?
Madam Mayor, we do not have anyone signed in.
Is there anyone wishing to speak? Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda and consent agenda, and I'm looking for a motion and a second.
I move for the approval of the agenda and the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussions? Okay, Madam Clerk?
Voting on the approval of tonight's agenda and consent agenda. Dumas?
Yes.
Wells?
Yes.
McClure?
Yes.
Calhoun?
Yes.
Bosenga?
Yes.
Mayor Terry?
Yes.
Your agenda has been approved and you have no consent items.
Thanks. Next on the agenda is other new business items, committee of the whole, timeline and process concerning the advantages and disadvantages of selling the electric utility, and I need a motion to go into the committee of the whole and a second.
I move that we go into a committee of the whole.
I'll second.
And I'd like just to outline, before we vote on that, I'd like to outline, I think that the most helpful thing during this time, once we go off the record, is to have administration provide their PowerPoint so that we have it in our packet, but just to get information. Council will have the opportunity to ask questions, then I'll turn it over to the community to ask questions. We'll pull it back. And then we'll see where we are. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay. Madam Clerk, did you want to call for a vote on that?
Voting on the motion to move into committee of the whole. Dumas?
Yes.
McClure?
Yes.
Wells?
Yes.
Bosenga?
Yes.
Calhoun?
Yes.
Mayor Terry?
Yes.
That motion is approved and you're moving in at 5:34.
Okay. So we'll turn it over to administration.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And if you're looking, these
You got them?
numbers aren't, or the packet's not numbered, which is fine, but yeah, it's also in your packet if folks want to follow along in the packet.
I thought I would start with just an opening comment to say, I actually wish there were more people in attendance. This, to me, is a critical issue that's going to kind of set the direction, in my opinion, for the city, certainly with the electric department and where we go. But I think that there's going to be long-term ramifications if we move this process forward that could affect other parts of city business. So, hopefully we have a number of people watching. But
Well, and maybe I'll just, since you started off with that, I might just ask a question. Us starting this process moving forward,
right,
which you'll go through the process in your...
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because because what we do tonight isn't making the decision one way or the other.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Understood. So with that, thought I would start with just some background for people who may not know. Council passed a resolution in May that requested administration assess the advantages and disadvantages of selling the electric utility. As part of that, council also asked administration to propose a timeline should the city move forward toward a special election at some point in the future. One note on voting, just so that the public is aware. Should this go to a vote, then 60% of those voting would need to approve in favor of the sale. One piece of information that I would like to see changed or different, but anyway, only those citizens that live within the city.
So, I don't know, I think we're on the next slide, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Only citizens that are within city limits are allowed to vote as part of the special election. So if we were to move it to the special election, while those citizens will not be able to cast a formal vote, I would love to see some process in place where we could, whether it's a survey or whatever, at least allow the people outside city limits that are electric customers to have a voice in the process. So something that we'll continue to discuss and come back to council with. One quick note there at the bottom is that in the year 2000, Seward residents did vote, and they actually voted in favor of selling the utility. They voted at a 52% majority, and that did not meet the 60% threshold. As far as how I put together the assessment of the advantages and disadvantages, I really...
Next slide.
Yep, sorry.
Okay, great.
I really wanted to hear from people on both sides of the issue. And so what I did is I did a lot of research. I looked at the Chugach Electric and the ML&P merger from just a couple of years ago. I also reached out to contacts I have in the southeast that have been through utility acquisitions and wanted to get their perspectives as well. Also met with and solicited input from employees, department heads across the city, including the city manager and the assistant city manager. And I also solicited input from members of the community. And again, I was looking for people who were opposed to selling, and I was looking for people who thought maybe it would be a good idea to sell, because I wanted both sides. The next two slides cover the advantages of selling. This again was put together with a lot of input. There's some of this information that's pretty obvious, but if you went to a larger utility, you would have more financial resources and a larger revenue base. And that's simply because you would have more customers, more meters that you're drawing from. You would also have more human resources, and with those human resources, you have more in-house expertise. That expertise could be in the engineering department, it could be in rate development, it could be in billing. And so they have full departments dedicated to these. I think you guys are aware that today we contract out for a lot of the services that we need. So we do spend a good bit of money on those consultants. Let's see, we also, with more human resources, you're going to have more bench strength. Basically, it's easier to replace employees when you have somebody leave. And, you know, we're so tightly staffed here that when we have vacations, sometimes it's a chore or challenge just to make sure we have the right coverage. So that would be something else. The next bullet is really one of the most important from my perspective. It's rate stability. What I mean by that is with more meters, you simply have, you can more easily spread your cost or your expenses. And I will use our infrastructure project as an example. We have about 2,900 meters here in Seward. And if you invest 10 million or 20 million and you spread those costs over those 2,900 meters, it's a fairly significant impact, or can be. If you have 50,000 customers or 100,000 customers, it's more of a blip on the radar than if you have just 2,900 customers. So you do get more rate stability with a larger utility. With a larger utility, it's, in most cases, you're going to have regulatory oversight, and you'll have that oversight in the rate setting area, as well as making sure that you're providing adequate services and programs for your customers. I mentioned programs. With a larger utility, you're going to have more customer-focused programs available. Anything from conservation programs to weatherization programs. I know that I get calls from people in the community here, and people drop by for meetings, and they would like for us to be able to offer more services and more programs. One example is the heat pump program. You know, we do not have natural gas here in Seward, and without natural gas here in Seward, I think, you know, heat pumps could be a viable option for homeowners or businesses, but we simply don't have the staffing nor the financial resources to make that happen. So with a larger utility, you would have more opportunities for that. You would also have greater access to customer-focused technology. And you've heard me talk about smart meters in the past. That would give people the ability to monitor their usage and hopefully find ways to save on their bills. Billing, we just went through a forensic audit. A larger utility is going to have a larger department dedicated to billing services, and you're not going to be looking at a 1 or 2 person department that's also doing public works as well. And I don't know if any of you have gone to other utilities and looked at their websites, but most of the other rail belt utilities, they have outage maps. So when you visit their website, you can see where the outage occurs, what time it happened, what caused it, and how long they expect power to be off. And, I've had Dustin sit in on meetings with me, and we've talked to other utilities, and Dustin's reaction every time when we get off is, we are really in the dark ages here in Seward, and we are. It's just a fact. You also will have a more enhanced local grid with automation and remote control. What that means is a lot of the work that we do today has to be done manually, whether it's in the plant or in the substations. And so we actually have to send a body out to the substation sometimes to make changes within the substation. Most of your other utilities, they have a control room and they can do those things remotely. So that improves your reliability, also your speed. Okay. On the next slide, please. With a larger utility, obviously, you're also going to have access to more equipment and materials. Today, if we have a major piece of equipment that breaks down, we either then have to look to rent one, or we have to just wait and until we can purchase if it needs to be completely replaced. With a larger utility, they're going to have a greater inventory of that equipment, and they would probably be able to just move over a piece of equipment from another location until you could make other arrangements. Also, if you went with a larger utility, the city would no longer be responsible for maintenance and the related costs that you have on major assets. We all talked in these meetings about the infrastructure. I think you all remember last year with the plant when we were making repairs to our generators, those are significant costs, and the city would no longer have to have that challenge in front of them. The city would also no longer be dependent on bonds and grants to fund infrastructure projects. Your larger utilities in Alaska and in the rail belt, they have those funds, and the type of funds we're talking about here in Seward, they have those available to go ahead and make those repairs and keep the maintenance, whereas we have to make arrangements to go for a revenue bond and seek grants. And they could go ahead and move that forward a lot more quickly. Let's see, if we were to sell to a larger utility, more than likely it's going to be an electric cooperative. With electric cooperative, you have a board of directors with a singular focus on the electric business, on the electric service. If we moved everything forward, then Seward would be able to negotiate to make sure they've got appropriate representation on the board, whether that's 1 position, 2 positions, or 3. That would be a part of the negotiation process. As customers of an electric co-op, you're actually considered a member or an owner, and that gives you as a member opportunities to participate throughout the year, whether it's in voting or in participating in meetings where you actually have a say. Each year they have an annual meeting, and members are encouraged to be there and participate. Co-ops also do not make profits. So anytime they have excess revenues, those revenues go back to their members each year in the way of a payment. So again, they do not make a profit. Any excess revenues come back to the members. Let's see. Also with one issue that Seward has that it's difficult to overcome is competitive wages that are for the non-union positions in the administrative positions. If you look at what the industry scale is, Seward is way behind on that. So as you have turnover, say at my position or Pat Dimitrovich's position, then you're going to have a difficult time attracting and retaining employees here in Seward unless you can become more competitive within the industry. Also, with a co-op, you're going to have probably a more streamlined approval process. It's not a knock on council, but sometimes, we have to wait on the council schedule before we can get in front and with a resolution for an approval. With an electric co-op, you may not have that delay. And then also with a co-op, you're looking at having a dedicated vegetation management. So they keep a contractor on payroll year-round every year, and they make sure their right-of-ways and their tree clearing is done in cycles. So some of them operate in 3-year cycles, some in 5-year cycles. Something that we just don't have the flexibility or the means to do. If you look at the next slide, it covers the disadvantages of selling. Now, while there are not nearly as many on this list, they are equally important, especially the first one. And when you look, and I talked to a number of people, the one that kept coming up is the loss of the general fund contribution. That is a significant factor that the city and the council, if we move this process forward, would have to look at.
And right now, that's about $1 million a year.
It's 2.1 when you look at the payment in lieu of taxes,
Okay.
along with the transfer fee for administrative services. And we'll touch on that in more detail in just a second. You also, if the city decides to move forward with shore power, there's the loss of cruise ship revenue, if you were to sell. You also have the potential loss of jobs in the administrative positions. I do not think that would happen, but when there's an acquisition, you can't guarantee anything. I'm almost certain that our line crew and our plant operators would be safe. In fact, I think if you had a company come in and purchase sewage utility, they would add positions in those areas of the business. Okay? You have rates for some people. They are afraid that if the rates aren't set locally or by the city council, that the rates are going to be higher. Again, that's a perspective they have. I felt like it was important to include it on this list. And then the loss of flexibility to use cash reserves for other fund deficits. So when the electric department is bringing in its revenues, if there's excess funds available within electric, and I don't know if the city has done this in the past or not, it's just one of these disadvantages that was put out there. The city then could use some of those funds to cover those deficits. Okay. I mentioned the general fund contribution. As I said, it was $2.1 million in 2021. That's the PILT, and that's the transfer fee for administrative services. So the big question that the city would have to ask itself is, and citizens if they went to a vote, is how will the city replace this lost revenue? I'm not sure, I have a silver bullet in the gun to answer that, but I think there are some creative solutions that are potentially there. I know that when I looked at the Chugach and the ML&P acquisition, part of the agreement was that Chugach Electric would pay the PILT for 50 years. So that portion of the administrative fee then would be covered. In our case, last year it was $1.1 million. They use a formula, or used a formula as part of the process. I'm looking into that to find out more about that formula, and if it's something that we could adopt here if we went down this path. If not, maybe we look at a different formula. But they did make some special arrangements with the payment in lieu of taxes. Okay. Also, one option maybe is after an acquisition occurs. If you take whatever is left after you pay off your debt from that acquisition amount and use that lump sum and put it into a permanent fund, then you can draw the interest off of that. I'm going to put a number out there just for conversation's sake. I have no idea what we would be looking at as a real number, and we wouldn't know that until we were to take in proposals. But for example, if you had a $25 million lump sum and you were able to draw 4% interest, that results in $1 million annually. Okay? So between, if you had that amount, and you could cover a portion of the general fund along with having your PILT covered, then you're starting to answer that question about the general fund. Okay? Another option that was mentioned is increased sales tax during the tourism season. So just do something that maybe would start May 1st and run through the end of September. Don't know, if that would be something the city would even look at doing, but it was mentioned as part of this process.
If I may.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor. Another option that we had talked about today is also related to the shore power as a disadvantage that we wouldn't have the income, but as far as for the load for electric, but we would have the sales tax generated off of
Right.
that electric
Yeah.
load that we do not have now. And that could be a larger amount that would also help to offset.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. This next slide, please. These are questions that I felt voters should ask themselves as they look at this process. If we start moving down the road toward a special election, I think that, again, this is a huge decision for the city of Seward and the people that live here. And if you were to move forward, there's certainly advantages to it, but I think that, there for the people that live here who would not want to move it forward, who would not want to sell, they have their reasons as well. So I think there's some questions that they should keep in mind when they're looking to vote. Is there a comfort in having an electric utility with the human and financial resources to make major repairs and properly maintain the local infrastructure? Is Seward okay having escalating rates as more money is invested to properly upgrade and maintain its infrastructure? On that one, you heard me mention earlier, 2,900 meters. When we start putting in the cost for the infrastructure, the $10.5 million that we're looking at on the revenue bond for Nash Road, we put that in the rates, there's going to be a nice bump in rates at some point. If we come back and we are paying for more infrastructure work along the way, over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see those rates going up. And that's the way an electric utility works, is when you are investing money into your system, that goes back into your rates. So it's really something that we have to keep in mind. If we maintain our system properly, we're going to be putting that back in rates, and we only have 2,900 meters for spreading those costs. Okay. How important are expanded programs and services to the citizens of Seward? In an industry where technology changes rapidly, does Seward have the financial means to make the investments necessary to keep up?
I was just going to go back up to that previous bullet point. You were talking about like green technology, the
Correct.
ability to look into alternate production, or more solar panels, or
You got it.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I get calls from people in the community all the time that are interested in those very things. And we just don't have the manpower to take those on. And that's just where we are as a utility. It's a fact. Would we ever have that? I'm not sure, right? So, again, in an industry where technology changes, do we have the financial means here to keep up and do what we need to? Again, as Dustin has said to me on a couple of occasions after conversations, we're operating in the dark ages compared to other utilities. And then as the utility looks to replace non-union personnel, does Seward have the financial means to be competitive within the industry? Because when people walk out the door, if you want to attract and retain talent, you're going to have to be competitive, and we simply aren't there today. Some final thoughts. Limitations on financial and human resources make it difficult for Seward's electric utility to function as efficiently and as effectively as it should. As currently staffed and funded, the electric department will never be able to offer the program services and technology of larger utilities. I do believe the city will struggle to fill important positions unless it can become more competitive within the industry. And I do think that the regulatory oversight while some people may see that as a disadvantage, I think they are looking at every utility in Alaska. And they're trying to make sure that the rate structures are fair, the rate structures are set up similarly, and that you have services that are equitable across all the utility spectrum. So I'm going to caveat this last point because this is coming from me. This is my opinion. I'm not speaking for the city. I'm not speaking for other members of the electric department. But I've been in the utility industry for 20 plus years. And I honestly think that the city is best served by selling to a larger utility so that the people in Seward can have the programs and services that they're looking for, and that the human and financial resources are there that we simply don't have. Now, my caveat to that is you can only do that if you can find a way to cover that gap in the general fund, at least a majority of that gap. And I think if you can find ways to do that, creative solutions, then the right thing to do for Seward and the people that live here is to sell. And I'd like to see us move forward. I think if we move this process forward and it doesn't sell, I think that's okay too, because that's the decision of the people that live here. And then we take those steps and we move forward and we try to figure out other ways of doing these things. But I think the simple and the best solution is to sell the utility to a larger company that has more resources to do the things that I would like to see us be able to do. Again, I think having the citizens vote on it is the right thing to do, and we'll see where we land. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to walk through the timeline.
Thank you. So the timeline, in our direction, it was to come up with a timeline. So this is the timeline that's proposed that, of course, is always subject to change and to any change that you would like to make. We would bring back a resolution to set the date of the special election and the ballot question to you. And the proposed date of the special election would be April 4th, 2023. Again, that would come back before you to approve. And then also a resolution, and this could come along later, but it's just on the list, resolution appropriating funds to influence the outcome of an election. That would come back to you. And then probably one of the, in addition to setting the date and deciding if there is going to be a question on the ballot, is also the issuance of a limited solicitation RFP, because then this will go out to the electric companies. We would receive the RFPs and then start the negotiation process. Those dates are up there. And then Brooks is on the line, but we have I checked with him, and those proposals come to you actually in executive session, and then we continue with negotiations until it's complete. The final date, you see the TBD, the final date, no later than December 31st is our goal for finalization of the purchase and sales agreement. And after that is finalized, what it does is allows then whoever that is selected, the provider selected, that company, that co-op to come in and provide public information. So they would be holding the meetings, providing the public information about their services, their rates, and what they plan to do in Seward. So that would be up until Election Day on April 4th. So that's the draft timeline moving forward, of course, subject to your approval and change.
Yeah, one more note, just talking in round numbers. We bring in about 12 million in revenue each year. About 5.5 million we give to Chugach for buying electricity. Another 2.1 million of our revenues go to the general fund in the PILT and in the transfer fee. So that takes us to approximately 7.5, 7.6 million of that 12. So that leaves us about 4.5 million to operate, and that's our salaries, that's our programs, that's keeping the plant running, that's paying for our fuel, any number of things that we're doing, the consultants that we use. So I guess my question is, when you look at the general fund itself, and you are running such a tight ship, at what point do you get where you may actually, if you're doing the things you're supposed to do, that you're starting to eat into what that normal contribution is to the general fund? You know, without doing a little more financial homework, I don't know that I can answer that right here today, but I do know it's a fair question, because I know that if we start spending the money we need to on maintenance and technology, then I'm not,
Going in the general fund anyways.
you got it. So.
And Madam Mayor, if I may, and as you know, if an enterprise fund goes in the red, so to speak, the general fund does have to make up the difference. So we had that with SMIC, and thankfully SMIC is going the other way now, but that is how it works. So something to keep in mind.
Well, we'll open it up for questions. I'll kick it off. So we had a lot of deferred maintenance that we needed to do, which we've already bonded for. So how would we, so within those bonds, are there any restrictions that would restrict our sale? Would we just, as we're looking at the purchase price and going out to RP, would they then assume, either pay off those bonds or
Yeah.
assume those payments? How's that been
Yeah, I'm gonna,
reviewed?
Jeanette, you wanna?
Thank you. I did speak with our bond counsel before we closed on the bond, you know, as full disclosure to bond counsel, that there's this idea floating around. I want you to know about it. I also wanted her to know maybe there would be grant funds, you know, anything that would affect the bond. And she said that we can do that. There would be some fees that we would have to pay, because what it does is then the bond isn't callable, meaning being able to be paid off until a certain day. But with the sale, it would make it immediately callable. There would be extra fees and fines, but it is doable. Did that answer your question?
No, I don't understand what you mean by all that. What do you mean? That means all that money comes due at that time?
Right, so if, right now we make the bond payment for a certain amount of years, and it's usually about 10 years in, it becomes callable, meaning you can pay it off without any fines or penalties. When we sell, we want all the debt paid off, whoever's buying us wants it all paid off too. And so the part of the purchase price would pay off the bonds. And so then I did talk to the bond counsel, how do we make that callable, meaning payable when we sell? And she said that there is a way, there are more fees and fines to make that happen, but that would also be included in the purchase price.
So that would be, what do we have now, 10?
About 15 million, we have
15
two
million?
bonds, yes.
And so that would, if we sell this utility, whatever we sell this utility for is going to go to paying off the bonds that we have,
And excess then would go into the permanent fund that we were talking about
which
earlier.
would be whatever's left.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
But they're also getting the additional assets of the transformers we have coming.
Absolutely.
And all the other things that those bonds purchase.
Do you want to speak to the need for evaluation, or I can, it's up to you.
No, I mean, well, for us, if we look at moving forward with this process, it's going to be important that we do evaluation of our assets, and that will give us an indication of what the value is of our system. And so that when we start working, or if we identify a company we want to negotiate with, we will know what to expect in return. If that valuation of our assets came back and it was such a low number, I think it would affect our decision for moving forward. I certainly think it would affect the decision of the citizens. I think if it's on the higher end, then I think that would affect the voters as well. And I think that if we move the process forward and we have however many companies interested and we take proposals in, if we can get through the process where we identify who the company is that we feel like is going to be the best partner for Seward and the money's right as well, then I think that's beneficial for voters, even though they're only voting on whether to sell or not. I think having that information and giving that company an opportunity to come into Seward after the first of the year for 2 or 3 months and talk about who they are and what they could bring to the table would be important information for the voters.
Are there any other questions? Go
I have
ahead.
a few. Is there any way, one of the things I hear a lot is users of our electricity not in the city limits really want a voice. And Is there any way of setting a special election area or something that would allow them? There is just absolutely no way.
No,
Could we
Brooks
do an
is,
advisory vote? Could we have
So-
some sort of advisory vote?
I think the borough would have to hold that. I don't know. We did consult with Brooks, and he's on the line, but the charter is clear. It's a municipal-owned utility, meaning it's owned by the residents, and so that's who votes on it.
But, having said that, as I stated up front,
Right.
these are customers of the electric department, and I think their input is valuable. They may not be able to cast a vote formally, but I think if there's a way that we can gather input from them, so we at least, they're getting a voice in the
Right.
process. I think that's what we should try to do. I don't know what that looks like yet, but it's something that we're going to continue to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Did you have another question?
So the vote, so the contract, we would be choosing through the RFP the purchaser. Would the contract be fleshed out then before the vote? So things that we feel strongly about having in the contract would be affixed, like, for example, keeping our generators active and
Correct.
maintained.
All of that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
We
there's,
can say that, but we can put that in there.
Yes,
Right.
yes. All of that, and the proposers, it would be listed as this is contingent on the vote, and then ratification of the election also, because it still has to come back to council to ratify. So it's subject to all of that, and that's what we put in there.
Did you have another question?
Not yet.
I think, there's absolutely things that the city would want to make sure are in a contract. And as we talked earlier, looking at possibly doing something with the PILT might be one of those things we want to make sure is in the contract. So,
And-
jobs, that might be another one.
And requirement for shore power, if that's what we choose,
Yeah.
if that's what we want. We do have the options to put all of that in and to negotiate them.
Well, okay, the other question I had, but I think you've already answered it. When we talked about this way back, I was concerned about people losing jobs and positions and stuff. And you're saying likely it would be people like you, but not the union
Well,
people.
what I will say is that I know that there are two organizations that have shown preliminary interest. And in some early discussions with them, they indicated that they would absolutely want to keep the operations people in place, that they would want to supplement and add bodies to the line crews and possibly the plant operators. Our position's my position. I think that they would plan on keeping as well. But I can't guarantee that.
Yeah, I just have some questions, I guess, and you probably can't answer them, but I would be interested in just knowing the, maybe approximate cost of just bringing us as far as the election, special election, what the cost of that would be, what the cost of valuation of utility assets, cost of the bond payoff, attorney costs, that kind of thing, what the cost would be to get it all the way to the election process. I think would be important, in case it all comes out
Sure.
and nobody even wants it.
I can answer a couple of them, and I will bring back more expansive and more, on-point answers. I'm guessing the clerk might know about a special election, the cost of the election itself.
I would budget for $6,000.
Okay.
As far as payoff of the bond, I'd have to get you the exact number since it just funded. I know it funded for 10 million, and then there would be the fees on top of that. So I'll get that for you. I'll contact our bond counsel. Valuation, I don't have a cost for that. Who would do
Yeah,
that?
I actually am getting a list of different companies or firms that do that work. I have not talked to any of them yet.
I'm sure it'd be in
So
the
that'll
hundreds
be-
of thousands of dollars, though.
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
don't.
I don't think it would be that high, but,
You don't think so?
no.
And then there would be attorney fees, and I'd have to get you a number for that
Yeah.
as well.
Thank you.
And we could, at some point, see if they bear those costs, but then it would be less if there was any permanent one.
Yeah, we're such a small utility, to go to your point. that the work to do the valuation of our assets, it would not be like an ML&P.
Okay.
It would not be like, MEA or Golden Valley. So, we're 2,900 meters. We have 50 miles of transmission line and 120 miles of distribution line.
That's true. Did you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Having been through this once already, although a long time ago, I think that they're doing a very good job of getting it in line and set up. And, it's always going to be the valuation and what somebody else is willing to pay, plus the education of the people of Seward to understand exactly, what's happening. I don't think the first time this came around that the education process was as good as it needed to be. So we'll see. I think they're doing a great job so far getting it lined out and put together though.
Let's turn it over to the public for questions, or does either questions or comments, since it's a work session format during committee of the whole, folks are welcome to make comments. Did you want to start, Rhonda?
Yes, I would, and I'd like to follow up with you saying, I do believe you're going to get a horrendous amount of blowback if you do not have your information up front. And I was thinking as you were talking about, the cost and benefits going to the advantages and disadvantages, it'd be really nice if you could somehow monetize those in some fashion.
Sure.
And to your point about the prepayment penalties on the bond is, if we can understand what that is, but I don't know what the timing is that, or when those get actually incurred. I mean, how old is a bond? At this point?
The bond closed in April, so
it's a new
it's
bond.
very new,
Oh,
very
that's the
new.
issue. I see. Okay,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
was-
And those costs will be incurred when it's paid off, so right at the sale, that we would pay it off.
Are they restricted to that particular purpose? It's not like that money would be used for anything else?
It's restricted to that purpose, yes.
Which I am just going to say at the same time, we needed to move forward with some deferred maintenance, so not knowing, because we could
Right.
go down this road and
Right.
not have the sale, and then we'd be 2 years into not having it.
Well,
which that's
can
fine.
maybe even that could be considered possibly could be built into the sale to avoid this? I don't know.
Oh,
if the cost
absolutely.
benefit-
Absolutely. I mean, that could be part of negotiations as well.
I am, on the RFP, when you do a request for proposal, is it the company coming in and say, hey, yeah, we're going to do this and this, or do you actually have some criteria set forth and like you said, you're going to do the assessment? What exactly is the protocol there as far as us identifying, what we want in this?
Well-
I'm also thinking, just let me finish my point, I'm thinking of the folks outside. They have a lot of different issues than what we have inside, and I think, and you maybe have already heard them and know what their concerns are, so I just want to make sure that those concerns are.
Yeah, could I sit here and tell you for certain I've heard all of their concerns? I have, probably not, but I have heard from some of them, so I'm probably aware of most of the challenges and some of the things that they face. But I do think it's important to hear from the people that live outside the city. And I would like to make this a part of the process somehow, some way, even though they will not be able to vote formally on the process. But I think hearing from them is very important.
But the start of that, if we went out to an RFP, we would have our specifications that they would have to respond to.
Correct.
Absolutely. And that's where I was going next, is we absolutely would put some parameters and guidelines in when we put out our RFP.
You done, Rhonda? We can swing back to you.
Yeah, I got a few more things, go ahead.
Okay.
Skip Ryerson, Inside City Limits. Thank you, Jeanette, Stephen, for the work, and Rob, for the work you've done so far. The process looks really good. It's a nice start and a kickoff. And we talked quite a bit about in town and out of town, and I think going forward, they're all customers of Seward. They're all us. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to create inclusion in the process, and I was going to offer just a couple of soft recommendations for consideration on the timeline. You all know that for the most part, we have a lot of snowbirds in town, so once the fishing seems to be over, everybody seems to start heading south. And we've got, one of the biggest decisions in front of us as a community to make. And so I'm wondering if it would be in our best interest to consider starting some town hall meetings, like the first week of September. Chamber of Commerce could do one with the business. We could have one in town, we could have one at Bear Creek, and try to get some town halls. I don't know what the attendance would be like. I hope it'd be a lot more than we have here today, and I'm optimistic it will. A lot of folks are just busy right now. And so that was one suggestion. And the other suggestion I had as a result of these folks not wanting to leave their desert homes and coming back up to Seward yet, I don't know, is the April 4th election date, is that cast in stone? It has to be that date for the APOC? So I didn't know whether that was going to be in our best interest to try to have as many people back here in town to vote that were inside the city limits. And I don't know how many people would be here on April 4th versus May 4th. But I just thought I'd throw that out there as something to consider. So. But I really like the process and done a fine job thus far, so thank you very much for your time.
Ben, did you have any comments?
Thank you. Ben Smith, outside city limits. Definitely this is a major decision for the community, and I'm very sympathetic to the challenges of maintaining the system like this in a small area. I would caution, that we are kind of unique. It's a small city on the rail belt, but there's a lot of small cities in Alaska that do operate their own utilities because of their locations. And some of those challenges, I would be, I'd be hopeful that a larger co-op would provide the service that we would expect, but we'd also be kind of hanging out at the end of the road, and that's something that we could look at in the contract for sale if that goes through to ensure. But I would definitely want to try to get Seward represented on the board as best as possible. And to that note, though, being outside city limits and being a ratepayer and not being able to vote on it is, that's a sore point. And as a co-op, if it did go through, we would have representation in that, so there's an advantage there. It's there's a lot of care and diligence required in this, and I appreciate the time to speak on it. And I'm also very, again, I've said this many times, but I'm very thankful for the work that the utility's been doing in the recent years. It's really come a long ways. So, thank you.
Hey Brooks, I might ask you a question. Would there be anything against, or would there be avenues to explore with a special advisory vote? Like people have to bring in their electric utility bill if they live outside of city limits, and with that they could get like an advisory ballot or something like that? Would there be boundary commission issues or election issues with something like that?
No. You could decide as a municipal government to hold an advisory vote of the customers of your utility and kind of set up the rules for that to happen. You certainly want to do it in a way that it was, meaningful and had integrity, so that you're getting, accurate participation. It has, when I think about it, you do have questions such as, if you have a business, is it one vote? If you have, 3 adults that are living in a household with 1 meter, is that 1 vote or 3 votes? I mean, there would be some details that would have to be worked out. It's not necessarily as simple as saying, well, all of our, customers have to vote. You have to have, clear rules and advance notice, and it wouldn't be what's called an election, so it wouldn't be subject to election rules. It would be an advisory vote, and, you set it up and run it yourself. There'll probably be some expenses associated with it, but, the way to do it, it might be one of those things where you think about a mail-in vote for something less expensive to administer. But it's not going to be illegal for you to decide to do something like that as long as it's advisory.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the dais? Any other, Rhonda, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself for the record. Rhonda Hubbard, I'm in city limits, 1800 Justin Drive. Would it, back to this timeline and maybe putting forth, could maybe you put in like a survey into one of the billing, statements that you have. But with that, you also have that plethora of information on the, and where you're monetizing and showing, the cost benefit and the advantages and the disadvantages. But I am just concerned that this timeline it seems like it's just around the corner. I'm not sure at what point you would disclose that to the public and to the ratepayers. Can you tell me that possibly? And if that would be a possible idea to just maybe have a survey as an advisory vote.
I think what administration is trying to do is first know what everyone's making a decision on. Is that correct?
Right. That's what we want, is to make sure that everyone knows, as you stated, what they're making a decision on. And there are some rules about what we can and can't provide too. So we have to make sure we fall within, as a municipality, some of the things that we can and can't provide. So one advantage is after negotiations, that company can provide everything. There are no rules for them, but we have some restrictions on what we can and can't do.
Can you provide, we have, like you mentioned, you shared some numbers, so many ratepayers, where our economies of scale are, there's 12 million, was it that you said we get?
Approximately 12 million in revenues.
In sales tax and property tax and those type of things. Those are already in our budget.
Right. We can't provide that. The only way that we can, that is, we have to then do the budget amendment for the authorization of funds to influence the outcome of an election. Once it becomes a ballot question, we have to follow all of the APOC rules that are in place, and so we would follow that. Once that's in place to influence the outcome, then we can provide that information. Up until there isn't a ballot question, like tonight with this information, we're fine. There's not a ballot question that's been put out there, so we do have to be careful that we don't skirt it where we provide all the information, forward load all the information, and then have ballot. But we just have to follow the APOC rules.
You have.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on one of Brooke's comments. I think, if I'm not mistaken, for instance, my wife and I live in the same residence, so we both have a vote. We have one neighbor. I would think from mile 3 to 25, we might consider just using the voting roll. If you've got 2 or 3 people in the house, we have to be fair about this. Maybe it's 2 votes and they're in a house.
Oh, no, I agree. I think he was just saying we have to have that outlined ahead of time. Yeah. But I think you're exactly right. Right inside city limits, both people, regardless if you pay it, or people might rent and not pay. It might just be rolled up into their rent, and they would still have the ability to vote. Yeah.
And a follow-up to my suggestion about the town hall meeting, if I didn't mention it, I think I didn't, was that it would give us the opportunity to take a look at, and listen to all the concerns and inputs from the community, ratepayers and citizens, before we get too far out there into September, October.
Oh, so are you thinking a town hall to help develop the RFP as opposed to?
I'm thinking, I'm just talking out loud about town hall to start the process with the community. Let's hear from them before a lot of them leave. Let's hear what their concerns are. We probably have to get an informational out there in advance, a quick one, to put a question and answer, a fact sheet of the top 10 things that utility may already be considering, administration may already be thinking about. And that might answer a number of questions, at least where we're going with them. There's no guarantees or anything, but at least a list of questions that we're already considering in the process. And, but you never know what you might learn if you just have a meeting. Somebody shows up and they have an idea, they have a concern out of town that is different from somebody in town. So it's just an opportunity to get the process going. And then it looks like we get back with them again there between January and March.
So, Skip, would you see this as a meeting where we would go through some of what we went through tonight with the advantages and disadvantages, and then open it up for questions and...
Yeah, that would be a good start. And then, like I said, I think if you already have a list of items that you're, like we talked, was mentioned, a generator. If the generators, and we want local linemen on the ground here to quick response, we want somebody at the utility desk. There's certain things we want as a community. We need to put those down as something that we're going to strive for, purchase and sell them. And I think a lot of those, if we can tick those off on a sheet and provide to the community, that might answer some of their questions.
I think we got to figure out the process for merging, because I don't think what we want in the electric department is much different than what the community would want. And so it's a matter of finding a process that is not too big, you know, and is going to get drawn out over a period of time, but something we can move forward pretty quickly. But I do think, you know, a lot of what you just mentioned, we would have been looking to make sure that's in the agreement or negotiated anyway. But I do think, hearing from the community, there may be things we haven't thought about, so.
And we had someone join us. Did you want to speak, or? Okay, thank you. So coming out of this, do you want a motion for us just to have you bring back a resolution at the next meeting with the timeline? I mean, I wrote down, I think having the election on May 4th as a special election is a good idea. And maybe that builds in a little bit more margin to have you know, some sort of meeting in September or August.
Can we ask a question? I would like to make sure, I don't know if Brooks heard that, but I'm not quite, Brooks, I don't know about town halls prior to appropriation of funds. But if a resolution hasn't been adopted setting the special election, is that okay? I know there are definitely prohibitions on certain meetings.
Well, the general question that triggers the APOC requirements is whether the municipal government is trying to influence the outcome of a ballot proposition. So certainly if the question has been placed on the ballot, then you would have to be, you know, there's nothing illegal about advocating for a yes vote or advocating for a no vote as a municipal government on a proposition that's on a ballot. It's simply that if you are going to be suggesting to the voters that they vote yes, you have to keep track of the expenses that you spend in that effort. You have to report them to APOC, and the council has to establish a budget ahead of time with a specific appropriation for, you know, how much money is going to be spent trying to influence the vote. With a town hall, the question can come up is, well, are you really trying to influence the vote, or are you simply providing information to the voters so that without suggesting one way or another whether they should vote yes or vote no? And you know, that can get into some gray areas, but that's that's a distinction that is relevant for these questions about political reporting requirements.
So I'm wondering if it's the safest bet to go ahead and do the appropriation funds and then have the town halls, just so that we're
Yeah.
safe.
So if we're on track with the August meeting, then we could just have town halls.
Right, yeah.
And maybe in hand with that town hall, there's a survey monkey or something.
Right.
Or out of the town hall, whatever gets brought up, then that's the survey monkey.
Right.
And then if there's additional information from there. But yeah, since Seward does our elections on a Tuesday as opposed to other communities, May 2nd would be So coming out of here, resolution to move forward, basically with the timeline and what's proposed tonight? Is that what you would be looking for?
Yes.
And the resolution would be at the next meeting or 2 meetings or?
Up to the council, I have it as the next meeting, and then I would, if it's the council's motion to whatever date, but bring forth all 3 pieces of that. The resolution for the special election, the appropriation, and then the authorization to issue the limited solicitation RFP.
Okay, so sorry, so you don't need any sort of resolution coming out of here other
No.
than the 3 separate resolutions?
Right, to
Okay.
direct to have it come back on the,
Okay.
whatever agenda you choose, but
Okay. Any other comments? The community, we'll go back in a regular meeting and then you can still have your 3 minutes, or actually, 5 minutes at the end. Are you good?
One more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, on what you're trying to do here, what you do then, I thought it was a little presumptuous, like we're gonna influence this outcome of the election, but you said something about front-loading it with more information than you are
Yeah,
supposed to. So I don't quite understand how that works.
So there's state statute language that, and Brooks could actually quote it all, but there's state statute language that prohibits municipalities from influencing the outcome of the election, either yay or nay. And like he stated, it's gray. Sometimes, like, we feel like we're just providing this factual information. It shouldn't tell you to vote yes or no. But there have been municipalities that have been sued over that. And so that's why if we appropriate money, it legally gives us the ability to provide the information. We have to file with APAC, we have to follow the rules, but it gives us the legal ability to provide that information and not end up in a gray area of, was that yes or no?
Okay, so you're coming out, right out front saying, we're looking to, we want to sell this utility.
We can legally say that.
Yeah, and then you can go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead.
That was going to be my question. Before, when we had a special election locally to decide a question, the council voted on what the council's position was going to be on the question and voted to not have a position. So will you all vote to decide what position you will have, or is that taking place tonight?
I think what we're doing is we're going to cover all the eventual outcomes, because we might get to the end and get to the RFPs, and then we say that's not good enough of a deal. But to protect ourselves, we're going to right now go ahead, well, there's going to be a resolution before any of that happens, just to say we can work towards influencing an outcome, so we don't get in trouble, like, here's the facts, and someone says, well, that's more than the facts, it has your spin. And
Understood, thank you.
I think that's where we're at.
So do we make a motion for these resolutions before we come out of this?
No, because we'll come out of it first.
Okay.
Because we'll have to be on the record.
Just
to do-
double check.
Yeah. So is there any other? Okay, so with that, we will come out of the committee of the whole, and we are back on the record. 6:35. So I'll go ahead and move, and I can get kicked under the table if I'm not doing it right. I'll go ahead and move for the administration to bring back at the August 8th meeting the 3 first items on the proposed timeline.
I'll second that. Do we need to specify that?
Can I just say that bringing a resolution, we have to bring an ordinance rather than a resolution to
Madam-
appropriate funds?
Madam Mayor? I did verify with Brooks that it can be a resolution because we're home rule, two things, so home rule municipality, we adopt and amend our budget by resolution, so it is legal that we can do it that way. I wanted to make sure of that as well, Brenda, thank you.
New attorney, thank you.
Is there anything else we need to do? Is that the only thing you're looking for?
That is, thank you, Madam.
I think we've talked about some of the other dates, so within that resolution appropriating funds to influence the outcome of the election, will you outline and look at what that date of the special
Yes.
election will be? Because then council can weigh in on that. And then, and that doesn't preclude, those resolutions may or may not have, like, what the plan is to get the information out to the public, but it
Right.
wouldn't preclude that either. Okay. Anything else I guess we can vote on that and see if there's anything else we need to do.
Just to make sure I understand, the motion is to direct the city manager to bring a resolution for special election, resolution appropriating funds to influence the outcome of an election, and to issue or to draft an RFP. What was the?
It'd be authorization to, so it'd be, because we're not appropriating money for that, it'd actually be an action memorandum, but it'd be legislation at the next meeting to authorize the city manager to issue a limited solicitation RFP.
Perfect.
And that, you wouldn't have that ready for approval because we're still gathering what all the specifications in that needs to be.
Right, we may not have that one ready, we're working with the attorney on that, and so we still have, we're very much in draft form, so I do want to say that that one, we'd like to have ready, and we will work towards that, but we may not.
No, I guess my question would be, we don't know what that RFP is going to say because we haven't.
Vetted the details.
Yeah. So we wouldn't have any RFP at the next meeting because there's not enough time to
Correct.
get more public.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that.
But would you have authorization to issue that and then you work out the details?
See, I think that's where we were headed.
Okay, yes, thank you. We could do that, and then, because as you know, by code, we don't, I want to make sure I'm quoting it correctly. I apologize if I misquote. I don't believe that there has to be council direction to do that. The city manager can just do that. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So,
The city managers should report out the
Right.
scoring criteria of
Right.
an RFP, but you are authorized to
Okay.
draft your own.
okay, thank you. And so then I'm just thinking of the mechanism then to report back, so. My apologies.
Well, so the only
Oh, yeah.
thing that,
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
the only thing that you would necessarily bring back to council is, right, the scoring criteria, but we don't approve any of the specifications.
Right. So actually, I don't think we need that authority on the third one.
We can just, so I'll amend my motion for the first two resolutions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and I agree.
Yeah, let's vote on that, and then I have another question.
Okay, voting on the motion to direct the city manager to bring back resolution for special election and to appropriate funds. McClure?
Yes.
Osenga?
Yes.
Calhoun?
Yes.
Wells?
Yes.
Demas?
Yes.
And Mayor Terry.
Yes.
That motion is approved.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah, that was my question, so unless you wanted council cover, unless you just want council that I think the first two, if you're setting a special election, appropriating funds to influence the outcome of the election, clearly part and parcel of that is developing an RFP.
Right.
Unless you want additional council direction on that. I can make a motion right now.
Yeah.
But we direct administration to work with the public, or to develop an RFP. I Commissioner Warren.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I like the idea of, because, again, trying to be careful of a lot of election laws, and I'm quite sure it doesn't go into RFPs, but I just really want to, it's all on record and everything, so that if there's any question, it's all on record. So maybe, you had a
Well, and I guess I'm gonna backtrack and just say, let's not usurp any administration ability. You know, I think at this point, there's enough direction that you can develop an RFP.
Right, and my plan is that you will have the criteria along with the RFP, you will see that as well. Madam, and just as far as the advisory vote, I'm going to work with, just FYI, work with the attorney and clerk and come up with something so that we have something for those that do not live in the city. And the timing of it, because that'll be an interesting thing, maybe we want to run it concurrent, so we'll talk about all of that.
I mean, I would want to see it concurrent so that it doesn't
Right.
influence one or the other.
Right. So we'll work out that, so we will work on that.
So, down to citizen comments, you have a chance for on the record, if you'd like to make comments, you can come to the podium and have 5 minutes. If there's anyone that would like to make additional comments.
Hi, my name is Susie Towsley, and I currently live inside city limits. I appreciate the time and energy that y'all are putting into this question. In the past, there's reason for some people to believe that local corrupt management of the utility led to the utility being used as a weapon, frankly, and not being managed as well as it could have been. And I believe that those findings were kind of laid out in the forensic audit that you all did, that there were gaps in our service as far as our utility goes, not in getting power, but gaps in whether or not billing was being applied appropriately and fairly to everybody that, was paying the bills. So perhaps if we're part of a larger organization that's someplace else, those problems won't come up again. I know that there are some people that are sitting on the council still that were there when those problems were a problem, and probably are going to remain on council if they get reelected and if they run. And I would think that becoming part of an organization that might buy out our utility would help to make sure that that kind of corruption doesn't creep back in and go unchecked and unaccounted for later in the future. On top of that, which is kind of negative, and I'm sorry, I know that there is a voice coming from y'all to move on and let the past go and move on to the future. The problem with that is if there's no accountability, it's very hard for working class folks that have literally had to leave town to reconcile that. There's no sense of trust at City Hall when you just ignore issues in the past. So I'm glad to see that you guys are all considering this. And I'm also super grateful for the new faces that we have on council since those problems were problems in the past. And for the work that you guys are doing. I'm very grateful for that we have a city attorney that is appropriate, competent, and giving you guys the right information that you need, that we have a city manager that is approachable by the public and seems to, care about the community. So I'm grateful for the progress that has been made, and I hope it continues. And I hope that I get a chance to vote on whether or not to keep the utility. I think it's a great idea to put a survey out there, because a lot of people that don't live inside city limits are ratepayers, and then some of us pay in our rent, but we don't necessarily have an account here at the city. So however you can capture those voices, I'm sure you guys are smart people, you'll figure it out, So thanks again for serving on city council, much appreciated. And thank you for listening to all the voices.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak?
Skip Iverson, inside city limits. I guess it was on the record. You asked us to come up, so I'm on the record. Thank you again, Jeanette, Stephen, Rob, good presentation tonight. Thank you, council, for taking the time out of your schedules to take up this important matter and progress this matter forward. And for all our citizens out to mile 25, again, just to reiterate, this is not an endorsement to sell. This is an endorsement to reevaluate and look at this valuable asset in our community, and to see if selling or retaining will make us a better, stronger community. And I look forward to the outcome of the studies and the results, the RFPs, the appraisal. So look forward to the process. Thank you very much.
Sir?
I wanted to thank Rob as well. I forgot to thank him.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Council and administration comments and responses to citizen comments, administration?
Nothing further, thank you.
Couple points real quick. I just wanted to say is that Jeanette, Rob, and myself were not here, obviously, the last time that the citizens voted on this, and Councilmember, excuse me, Calhoun mentioned something that I think is really, really important, and that is the last time the citizens voted, they didn't even know the price, the terms, the conditions, who that party is, and I think we can all say, you know, it's kind of like being asked, do you want to sell your home? But you don't know who you're selling it to, you don't know what the price is, you don't know when the closing date is. That would be very, very difficult to vote on that. And our goal here is to give the citizens as much specific information. And our goal, based on that timeline, is for people to know exactly the terms, conditions, and, you know, of that transaction by December 31st. So that'll be from January 1st until the date of the election that folks can really marinate and dig into that. The other really, really important thing is that the city, if we're going to appropriate funds to influence the outcome of the election, will be providing information. But probably more importantly, whoever that entity is that's going to be coming in to purchase. Because it's not just about the price, it's also about who that provider is, and we really, really want to make sure that whoever that company is going to have an ample interaction with our community so that they can speak to folks and provide that opportunity for questions and answers. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of those really two important distinctions that we think are going to position our citizens to make a really informed decision on whether to sell the city asset. So, thank you.
Councilmember Wells?
No comment.
Councilmember Calhoun?
Just one comment, a little bit. Actually, back in that day, we did know how much the sell price was going to be, and we did have set up what we were going to do with the money once the sale went through, if it had gone through. We did have a big community meeting where the company that wanted to purchase the utility came and laid out their plan and did everything, and people got a chance to ask them questions. We did go through that process, so we can just, you know, maybe do a little more this time and see how it goes.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, administration. Good presentation, I think. Thanks to the members of the community that showed up and testified tonight. Thank you for your comments. That's it.
Thank you. Councilman DeMoss?
No, I don't have anything. Thanks.
Vice Mayor?
No comments.
No comments from me?
I got a chair.
I'm sorry.
I was going